for downloading this episode of Cork Talk with me, Tim Atkin. A weekly conversation with some of the most famous people in the world of wine. Michael Schmelzer is a citizen of the world, brought up in Italy, France, Germany, and the United States. Today, his home is the brilliant Monte Bernardi estate in Chianti Classico, a property that his family has owned since 2003. Australia trained, he's a winemaker who believes in the traditional European ways of doing things, using biodynamic farming to get the best out of his vineyards and keeping intervention in the cellar to a minimum. Hello, Michael, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Tim. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
You're at home in Italy, aren't you?
I am. I'm at my home in Castellina in Chianti, right next to Panzano, where the farm is, Monte Bernardi. I just got back from a whirlwind tour, so I'm happy to be back. Spring's about to start.
You've been away for a month or something, really?
Yeah, I've never done a trip this long, but I'm doing an EU promotional kind of budget, and everything just happened to be squeezed in before Vin Italy. So it was a very intense but fruitful and lovely month.
Well, fantastic and great to be talking to you. We're mostly going to talk about Chianti Classico and about Italy, but I want to start by talking a bit about you because you're amazing. You're a real citizen of the world, as we're going to find out. Let's start with where you were born, because you were born in Italy, where you now live, but not in Tuscany, but in Piemonte, right? Just tell us a bit about your parents.
That's right. I was born in Ivrea, just outside of Torino, and it was because of my father's job. We moved quite a bit. He's a German-born citizen, and my mother's an American-born citizen, and they met in Michigan at university. And my father ended up leaving Germany and staying permanently there with my mom, and they got married, and then we moved quite a bit. First, my sister was born in Michigan. Then they moved to Italy. I was born in Italy, and then we moved to France. My brother was born in France, and then we returned to Michigan, a suburb of Detroit, for probably 12 years or so. And then we moved the final time together as a family to Wiesbaden, Germany, just outside of Frankfurt. And I went and finished high school in the Frankfurt International High School. So, yeah.
What did he do? Was in the army? Was he a diplomat?
No, automotive parts company, hence Detroit, Michigan. So a lot of ball bearings and wipers and spark plugs. Not super exciting, probably, but it definitely had us trotting the globe, which was very fortunate part of his job. So.
And was he a wine lover? Was wine part of your upbringing?
He was a wine lover, but he never researched or went into the depth of wine. You know, he was one of those, he is still a wine lover, probably more so now that I've taught him a lot of things about the details. But I would say that he would go out to many dinners with colleagues and have to entertain as part of his job. Colleagues from other parts of the world coming to visit the plant and things like that. And someone would probably know more about wine than him, and they would order something, like a Domaine du Jacques or some, wonderful wine from Italy or Bordeaux. And if he really liked it, he would buy tons of it, and that's all he would drink for years. So he had his favorites, and I think I was exposed to some really high quality wines, but I probably knew what part of the world it came from, and maybe the grape, but that's about as far as he really delved into the subject matter. So
yeah. I mean, you had this very cosmopolitan upbringing. I mean, German, American, Italian, France. You lived for a while. I mean, I just wonder how that upbringing affected you. I mean, has it made you more open-minded? Do you think that being brought up with all these different cultures?
Absolutely. Not only living in those different places. I don't really, of course, I was too young to remember Italy and France in the first pass before Michigan, but every other summer we would return to France and see family friends that we made in that first living experience. And so the family had boys the age of my brother and my sister would be shipped off to Germany and spend time with the cousins. And I remember that very strongly. And I remember being very aware of the quality of food, going just in a simple like Auchan grocery store and, and the mom picking out all these things. And she was pretty bad. She would just open a bag of croissants and taste them and decide if they were good enough. And I was so shocked. I was like, that's nothing I would have ever seen anywhere else. But we had just the most amazing food experiences starting way back then. And I think it also opened me up to knowing that there was food beyond a suburb of Detroit, Michigan, that I think was pretty limited back then. So I started with cookbooks at a very young age, and I don't remember if I was encouraged by my parents or if it was just purely my own kind of instinct and desire to do so. But it was, I mean, we're talking probably 8 years old, kind of starting to look at cookbooks and try cooking bread out of James Beard's cookbook and things like that.
I want to come back to the food in a minute, because what did you study at the University of Colorado? Because I know it wasn't wine. Did you have a career path in mind? Were you thinking, hey, I'll do what my dad did? Were you going to be a lawyer? Were you going to be a doctor? I don't know.
No, I studied business administration with an emphasis in marketing. And it was more food still at that time. My pure passion and love was food. At that time, I was reading every book I could get my hands on, from M.K. Fisher, Elizabeth David, Richard Olney, every book about food I was reading. And I think I thought that I would eventually have my own restaurant, I think is what I thought. But I continued in the restaurant and working in kitchens. I started at that very young age, actually in Germany, in Wiesbaden, at probably 14 years old, 15 years old, as a favor to my father, who was a big client of these two Sicilian brothers who had the best Italian restaurant in Wiesbaden. And I helped prep veggies and then started making the desserts and then started, working my way up. And I would spend every free minute, like all summer, working, there and learning and listening to Eros Ramazzotti nonstop, 24 hours. And yeah, it was an amazing experience. And I think by the time I got to university and I started to cook, let's say professionally, I was never a chef. I was an aspiring chef. I started to understand the lifestyle better, because then I could work the nights and I worked the holidays, and I was starting to realize that it wasn't the best lifestyle out there for me personally. But I was still going. Every summer, I would go to France and study the next level of Le Cordon Bleu. So I started with the beginning, the first summer, then the intermediate the next summer, then advanced the third summer, and did the whole Grand Diplôme cuisine and pastry there. And loved every minute of it. But I think already in the back of my mind, I was thinking, well, maybe I'll do food marketing. Maybe I'll do, something related to food. But I think I already knew that dream of owning my own restaurant wasn't so appealing anymore.
So were you put off by the hours, is what you're saying? Was it always seeing what it was actually like?
Yeah, the hours, the environment of the heat and the intensity. I mean, I think I'm very good under pressure, and I was pretty good at it, but it wasn't enjoyable. And the idea, and most of the chefs that I work with had some kind of vice or problem because of that lifestyle that I could
personality disorder, right?
Or drinking problem, drug problem, woman problem, some kind of problem that probably was a reaction, or maybe it's just the type that's drawn to that lifestyle and that livelihood. I don't know, but I could see it wasn't mine.
Well, maybe, yeah, it's interesting,
Yeah,
isn't it? Yeah. And there was a kind of wine component, wasn't there, on the course? You were learning a little bit
there
about being a
was.
sommelier, and there was a wine course, yeah?
There was, and I'm very grateful there was because it was an elective. So because I was
Mm,
doing cuisine and pastry, I was doing 8 hours a day, 5 days a week in the school.
mm,
But on the weekends,
mm,
they offered an elective course with a
mm,
classically trained som, uh,
mm,
and every other weekend, we'd be in the classroom, and the other weekends we would travel to a region on a big bus and visit winemakers and visit estates and see cellars and smell the vineyards and the cellars and meet these personalities, amazing personalities. And in the classroom, I couldn't believe how complex the wine world
mm,
was. How this one fruit could make so many different expressions around the world, and change so dramatically in such a small geographic area. I was just completely hooked and started reading books about wine instead of food. So that started the path for sure.
Yeah, and I read that one of your eureka moment, if you like, was you went to the Loire Valley, I think, didn't you? I mean, the Loire Valley, for anybody listening who doesn't know the geography of France, is probably the closest region to Paris, maybe apart from Champagne and Chablis,
Yeah.
really. I mean, it's a bit
Yeah.
equidistant, depending on where you are in the Loire. And you went to see Jacques Blot, didn't you? I mean, he's a very
Yes.
famous winemaker.
Yes, he
Yeah.
was quite a character. Unfortunately, passed
Mm,
recently. I think 2 or 3 years ago. But I wish I
mm,
would have gone and seen him again and thanked him because I've had quite a few of his wines since. But he was, a very flamboyant and passionate. Winemaker, and talked about biodynamics, which I had no idea what biodynamics were. And it would just kind of reinforce the things that I was learning in the classroom, and I got to see them, in 3D, and from someone who was clearly passionate about doing it. So I needed that as well. That was a puzzle
mm.
piece that I needed, but it didn't occur to me that I could do that yet. That came with the next eureka moment.
Well, so give me the second eureka moment, really, because when you went to a dinner, didn't you? Was that how it
That's
happened?
right. That's right. I went to a dinner. This was thanks to my father's career again. One of his colleagues from the accounting world, Gary Bauman of Ernst and Young, ended up buying into a pretty well-known winery in Gaiole and Chianti Classico called Riecene that was owned by a very
Mm,
famous Englishman named John Dunkley. And it was complete happenstance. I was probably in Colorado, or maybe I was in France when my father told me about the opportunity. He said, "Would you like to come to the Gary's 50th birthday party? He's going to have wines from like 1890 every decade until the current decade." And it was an incredible opportunity, and I said yes right away, and I ended up
mm.
going there, and it was an amazing experience. There was also a very famous Italian young chef there who was on the cover of Wine Spectator a year or two later, who I'm still friends with. But I also met Sean O'Callaghan, who was the English winemaker helping John make the wines already in the late 1990s. I think probably his first year was roughly actually 1992. But I met him in the late 90s. And I think that was the other piece I needed. I was like, wait, an Englishman making wine in Chianti Classico? It was, it started me down the road of thinking about winemaking instead of maybe more the technical kind of sensory side and writing side.
Yeah, so
So,
yeah, you thought,
yeah,
hey, I could do this too. So, I mean, you went to Adelaide, didn't you, in Australia, to study
yeah,
enology and viticulture. I
I
mean,
did.
why Australia? Could you not have done it in Italy?
California or Italy or
Yeah. Mm,
France. I think I had, from what I read in English at that time, I thought I wanted to go to UC Davis in California, but actually, I think the first thing I tried to do was just get experience in a winery to see if I would like it. And I knocked on doors in Napa Valley and Calistoga, and I met this wine producer that I don't know how many people outside of the region know him, but I think he was a pretty important figure in that area, called Robert Pacoda. And he was extremely sweet and said, Michael, I'll hire you tomorrow, but I strongly recommend that you go first and study enology and or viticulture. And I think I already knew that my personality, my kind of the way I think and do things, I would eventually have done that. So I went to visit Davis and Fresno State on that trip, and luckily I was able to meet with the head of the department at Davis, and he told me because it would be a second degree student kind of entry that I'd have to do like a year and a half of prerequisites. And I said, forget that. I'm not trying to be a doctor. So I looked into Australia because I had heard that, they were coming up as one of the most important wine schools in the world. And so I applied and I got into Adelaide, and it was one of the most fortunate kind of things to happen to me, because it was exactly the kind of experience that I needed, with the right mix of practical and theory, but more so because they didn't have history and tradition of maybe studying in Italy or France. I would have assumed that I was being taught traditional winemaking in France or Italy. I think I realized that being there with no, varieties that have been grown there other than the port wine varieties, that they were basically throwing everything at a wall and seeing what stuck, and applying this kind of modern way of thinking in viticulture and winemaking that was pushing all wines to the center. And although I loved it my first couple of years there, those wines, I started to realize that they were missing subtlety and elegance and a sense of place and tradition that I remembered from the wines that my father exposed to me in my teens. So it was so critical to my path, and so I wouldn't change it for the world. But yeah, I kind of joke that I do the exact opposite of what I learned in Adelaide now. So,
But that was where you first became interested in biodynamics, I think, which has become
that's
central
correct.
to the way you farm today. I mean, I always think, with Steiner, you see vineyards that use biodynamics and the vineyards work, but it's quite difficult to explain, isn't it? I mean, if somebody says to you, hey, I hear you follow biodynamics, and they're a layman, how
Yeah.
do you explain it briefly to them? What are the essential tenets of
Yeah.
biodynamism?
Well, first of all, what I say is it's like homeopathics for the vineyard and
Yeah.
for agriculture. And I say it's really just a collection of old farming practices that were around Central Europe, before the early 1900s. And then with the introduction of chemical fertilizers and other products after the factories that made nitrogen for bombs for the war closed, they siphoned it into another part of industry, which would be agriculture. And then the story goes is that after decade or two, the farmers started to realize the damage that these introduced products were doing. So they asked Steiner to teach them how the farmers used to farm. And so he collected all these practices from talking to people and researching. And that first lecture, or the series of lectures, is the foundation of what we call biodynamics. But now that I practice it, I say, he wasn't a farmer, and so his explanations are quite philosophical and spiritual, and I take a much more analog scientific kind of explanation or approach to it, which I needed to embrace it fully before applying it liberally at
Yeah.
Monte Bernardi. So
Interesting. So it's sort of traditional wisdom in a way, pre First World War wisdom and
exactly.
pre agriculture, pre industrial farming in a sense. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The same way probably Chinese medicine and homeopathics that we call homeopathics
Mm.
today, things passed down generation to generation based on plants and things that were available to the farmers at the time that they saw symptoms and problems in their
Mm.
agricultural farms, and they tried things like oak bark, stinging nettle, chamomile, uh, all these things, and they tried, steeping them, fermenting them, mixing them with different things, and the ones that clearly had benefits to and that they believed in, they passed on from generation
Mm.
to generation. So they are, long tested kind of
Mm.
examples and
Mm.
practices. And if you understand the science behind it, it's much easier to embrace fully. 500, the commoner that goes into the cow horn, is
Mm.
just simply a compost that was made in a porous vessel that
Mm.
allows it to be turned into compost without too
Mm.
much water and too much exposure to oxygen, being
Mm.
above ground and drying out. So then we stir it into a large quantity of water with a small quantity of compost because we're not interested in the compost. The compost is food for what we're growing in that water as we stir it. We're stirring it to extract food to feed aerobic fungi and bacteria. And that is called a composted aerated tea. And we know what that
Mm.
is, and that's what we're making. And that is sprayed into our fields in large droplets and ends up being the base
Mm.
of the pyramid that feeds all the life in our soil.
Mm. Mm.
So
Interesting. You did this degree in Australia. You did some vintages there, didn't you? You worked with Geoffrey
yeah,
Crossett, a good friend of
yeah.
mine, his wife, Stephanie Toole, in the Clare Valley. I mean, you clearly decided you didn't want to make a living in Australia because of this, as you were saying, the methods that you saw there were making you think, hey, this is maybe not what I want to do. But what took you back to Italy?
Yeah, it wasn't the methods. It wasn't there was amazing terroir there. There was amazing opportunities to kind of figure out and find something. I was interested, but I think the distance from everywhere else in the world was less attractive to me. And I did want to kind of relearn how to farm the way we used to farm. And I felt that was something that I couldn't do there as well. So I don't
Mm.
know if I thought I would come back to Australia originally or not, but Monte Bernardi ended up coming up, and then all the choices were made for me essentially. So I
Well,
had,
tell me about that choice and why Monte Bernardi? Because I think your family were looking to get into the wine industry, and didn't
yeah,
you tell me once that you looked at the south of France as well, or they looked at the south of
yeah,
France? But
that's right.
why Chianti Classico and why Italy in particular?
Yeah, I mean the idea developed as a family project when I was in Australia already studying wine and viticulture, and I never thought I'd have my own property, to helm. But I think when I was probably 2 years in, my parents were starting to talk more actively about their retirement, and they were in Germany. And my sister, who's 4 years older than me, was also probably not super satisfied in her career at Price Waterhouse. And and so my sister suggested to my parents that if they retire on a property that had vineyards, that Michael could make the wine and she would sell it.
Mm.
So that's how the idea started. And it did start in France because my first passion was France and French
Mm.
food and French wine. And also my parents, I think, were already thinking south of France. But when we started to actually look at properties, we didn't see things that had all the pieces we wanted as a family aligning. So it either had great winemaking potential, but not great lifestyle potential, like too far away from a city, too isolated in the hills, like in Pyrenees and in the Pyrenees. And then the ones that had, the lifestyle had very low quality potential, huge vineyards, valley floors of Languedoc-Roussillon and things like that. So Bordeaux, we saw a nice place in Bordeaux with the river stones and the Grave, and I knew the potential was there, but the kind of, maybe it was the time of year, it just felt so industrial and so cold to me that it just didn't call my name and
I
didn't
think
draw
I
me
think
to
you
it.
made the right choice, didn't you?
I think so too. So we expanded our search into Italy and we looked from Piedmont to Umbria, but I think we heavily focused in Tuscany very quickly because of the lifestyle and the potential. And when I saw Monte Bernardi, which was thanks to Sean O'Callaghan again, he told us about it. It wasn't on the market, I think officially, because it was a bitter divorce and one wanted it on the market and one didn't. So I don't know if we would have found it without him. But when
With
I
him,
saw
yeah.
it, I think we were all just completely hooked and thought, I saw the potential for the winemaking. It had everything I could possibly want: steep slopes, rocky soils, big drop in temperature at night, noble grape. I just couldn't understand why it wasn't a region that was more um, appreciated. This is early
Better known, yeah.
2000s. Chianti Classico was not appreciated. It's more appreciated today than it was
I
then,
think it's,
but it's
yeah.
still not as appreciated as I feel like it should be. But I realize now, being here for almost 24 years, that we're largely at fault for that lack of recognition with the choices that we make within the consortio that push towards brands and not zone and more towards international styles and palettes and things like
I
that.
want to come back to that in a minute and talk about the subzones and about international styles. But tell us a bit more about the property, because it's very old properties and dates back to the 11th century. The first
Yes,
wines, modern wines, were made, I think, 92, and you guys arrived in 2003. I mean,
that's
I
right.
just wonder how were you received locally? I mean, do people say, "Who are these guys coming in?"
Yeah.
And what did you set about changing immediately?
Yeah. I mean, it the first wine under the name Monte Bernardi wasn't until 1992, because it was one of the classic small farms that was under a much larger landowner who would centralize his production under his own marchio, his own brand. But it had grapes on it for as far as we can, look back. But yeah, the brand name Monte Bernardi was created by the prior owner to the Schmelzer family, our family. And he was a Greek Cypriot who made his living as a commercial photographer and director in London, and decided to move and start making wine in Chianti Classico. And he started the first labels and started kind of making wines in what I would say is a more the way I learned in Australia, barrique and kind of more in concentrated, intense style that um, I saw as kind of hiding or covering the beauty and the essence of that special part of Tuscany. That the center of Chianti Classico is so unique and can make very perfumed, aromatic, and elegant wines. But if we start dropping fruit and using yeast and doing table sorting and barrique and other varieties that are non-traditional, it starts to look like a super Tuscan wine. And then you might as well make it in a place that costs less than than the heart of Chianti Classico, because
Yeah,
the plots are
because
small,
Chianti
they're
Classico
steep and
is
rocky. Yeah, sorry,
yeah.
go ahead.
Chianti Classico is the original Chianti zone, isn't it? I mean, it's one of 7 regions, really, or sub-regions within Chianti Classico, within Chianti, rather. What makes
Exactly.
Chianti Classico stand out? Is it altitude? Is it soils? Is it a
Yeah,
combination of factors?
it's a combination. Absolutely.
Mm.
Altitude, steep slopes, the rocky soils, big drop in temperature at night, all give these perfect conditions to ripen tannins and get these brighter perfumed aromas like black cherry, or cranberry, and fennel and just the right amount of tannins and acidity that make them really age-worthy. I think it's possibly the greatest food wine on earth, but we don't
I
make
like
it
that.
often. We don't make it to reflect that. It has, and it
Yeah,
can age well as well.
yeah.
But when we start changing kind of the old traditions and go to smaller barrels and different things, we start to hide those characteristics.
And within Chianti Classico, how different are the subzones? I know this is something that you feel very strongly about, don't you? I mean,
I
you're in
do.
Panzano, right? Yeah.
I think all the zones have merit and great combinations of characteristics that can make beautiful wines. I think I don't think many people realize, but Chianti Classico's 20,000 acres or around 8,000 hectares of
Yeah.
vineyards, and that happens to
Yeah.
be very close to the amount of Pinot Noir planted in Burgundy. And the way we're forced to sell our wine today is to just call it Burgundy and not be able to call out the subzone. So you can't imagine every Pinot Noir leaving Burgundy just being labeled as Burgundy, but that's how we're selling Chianti Classico.
So you
And it's
can't use the subzones on the label, right?
not in that way, not in a very,
Mm.
not in the way we want to underline it, to kind of highlight the subzone. In Gran Selezione now, the top tier wine, you can, but it's, this is a commercial interest thing again. Many people don't realize that consortios are weighted voting. The more
Mm.
stickers you buy, meaning the more bottles you sell, the more vote you have. It's a weighted vote. So obviously it favors the commercial producer or the
Mm.
bottler and not the small growers, even though as small growers, we far outnumber the bottlers. So
Mm.
that decision to start with Gran Selezione was because the big ones don't have any interest in highlighting the subzones on their smaller bottlings because they can't break up the wines into all these different subzones. They need to be able to
Yeah.
blend them all in.
It's interesting. It's exactly the same situation in Rioja. It's weighted in favour of the bigger producers who buy the biggest number of back labels to put
I
on the
didn't know
labels,
that.
and
Yeah,
therefore
that's
that's where you.
interesting.
Yeah, it's exactly the same thing. I
I,
just want to ask you quickly about Sangiovese. Does Sangiovese do better on certain soil types, certain aspects, certain altitudes, or is it a great variety? It's grown all over Italy, isn't it? But does it
yeah.
give of its best? Do you think in certain places?
I mean, I'm biased. I, I I certainly think that the rockier the soil, the steeper the slope, uh, it's certainly going to give you more of the characteristics that I think of in the greatest wines of the world. And the wines age wonderfully from that zone. Uh, but I believe in the end, wine is food. I always have had that kind of perspective. I don't like to kind of make it too complicated. I think in the end, the more we get into the education, the more we enjoy wine. But in the end, I don't want someone telling me which food I should like, in the sense. So I think in the end, we need the tools and the understanding from experts like you, and but we also need to trust our palates and our experiences to be the final judge, I think.
I mean, how many different wines do you make? I know you make one white, but how many
Too
reds are there?
many,
Five,
too
six?
many,
Too many.
too many.
Go on. How many?
Yeah. I can't, I think it's eight
It's eight.
estate wines, 7 or 8,
Yeah, yeah.
if you count the white. But yeah, it's because of this desire to show the purity of the place and the uniqueness of the old vines, the young vines, that I have a hard time We have two Chianti Classicos. This is the best illustration of it. One is the vineyards that I planted around Monte Bernardi called Retromarcia Chianti Classico. The other one is from vineyards that we purchased in December of 2018 called San Joe, and it's above Panzano. I didn't plant it. It's in a different place. It's only 3 kilometers away as the crow flies. We bought it thinking we'll convert it to organics and biodynamics under this name, San Joe, and then when it's converted, we'll put it into Retromarcia. But the profiles and the perfumes were so different. I said, I can't do it. They're
Gonna make a
too
different wine.
unique. Yeah, it would totally change this wine that we had a 15-year history by that time, I think, at least. So, yeah, it was it's kind of like
And apart from the white,
yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
go on. No, I was going to say, apart from the white, all of the reds are Sangiovese based, as they have to be if they're Chianti Classico, but you do make IGT wines as well.
That's right. That's right. So the core is the Chianti Classicos, 2 Classicos, well, 3 Classicos and 2 Reservas. That's 5.
Okay.
Then we have the 2 IGTs. The old vine version that was the passion project of the previous owner called Zingana, which is a Bordeaux blend, no Sangiovese, vineyard 1968. But it's in a prime position, and I wanted to move it to the borders of the property where I didn't think Sangiovese would grow very well, where it wouldn't thrive. So frost pockets, bottom of the hill, high humidity. So I planted, at the same time I planted the Retromarcia Sangiovese vineyards, where I didn't think I could plant Sangiovese. I planted these varieties, the Bordeaux varieties, with the idea that one day I would pull out Zingana and replace, the position on the property. So, but we end up, so far we've kept both. So the young vine version is called Zingarella and the old vine version is called Zingana, but no Sangiovese in either of those.
Just tell us how you describe your winemaking style, because you've talked about biodynamics and how it looks back to the good things of the past. Does that kind of describe your winemaking approach as well? I mean, it's a sort of scientific interpretation of the good things of the past.
It is, yeah. I think I like to think of myself as a traditional grape grower and winemaker using this accumulated knowledge of the past. And it's not only the history and understanding that the Sangiovese grew in our region next to the things that thrived, like the Chianina cows and the white beans and our famous dishes that were kind of largely peasant dishes. The bistecca would go to the cities from the cow, but the offcuts would be made into paposo, stracotto, lampredotto, all these different things. And I think Sangiovese just kind of proved to be the perfect match for it for, centuries and centuries. And I think the more modern we make the wines, the less it's not only suits the traditional dishes, but also actually food in general, because it becomes more of a meditation wine and less of a food-friendly wine that the wines of the past were.
And one of the wines you make is called Fiasco, isn't it? I mean, it's a bit of an in-joke, isn't it? Because wasn't the Fiasco was the wicker flask that the traditional Chianti Classico was sold in. But yours doesn't have a wicker flask, does it?
No, it did in the beginning, but not with that name, actually. We just made one with one that said Monte Bernardi Chianti Classico in the wicker, in the grass basket, because a wine shop in New York wanted good wine to be in that bottle again, because he didn't want that negative image. But actually, Fiasco, I use that word. That's a negotiant wine. It's not from our vineyards, for 2 reasons. One is because we had a fiasco when I created it. We lost half our Retromarcia crop to frost. And then because of the bottle, which we call Fiasco, like a flask. So it's a double kind of meaning.
It looks like fun. Just tell me a little bit about how you age your wines, because we didn't really cover that. I mean, you're using amphoras, and you'll certainly use big botti, aren't you? Those big Slavonian barrels as well.
I like big cement and big barrels. I'm not crazy about amphora for Sangiovese, because I think it's like barrique, it's too much oxygen. The secret to bringing out the elegance of high acid aggressive tannins, let's say rustic tannins in Sangiovese and probably other varieties as well, is like Nebbiolo, I would say is definitely true, is having the right amount of oxygen coming in, because oxygen dictates kind of the evolution of the wine. So too much oxygen with Sangiovese releases the flavors and aromas too quickly and doesn't allow the tannins to come together and polymerize and become longer and weightier and more elegant. So by going back to big barrels or big cement, you have that kind of high surface to volume, a low surface to volume ratio that gives you the right amount of oxygen per liter per month.
Yeah. So
you
bigger
get that
volume of wine means less
oxygen.
oxygen ingress, basically. Yeah.
Exactly.
How interesting. No, that's fascinating. I'd never thought about that with Sangiovese, but it makes a lot of sense. And I love your description about it being the ultimate food wine, that you're always thinking about what does this go with? And it's, this thing you talked about being obsessed with food since you were 8, right?
Yeah.
So the food came before the wine, right?
It did. For me, it came before the wine. But I kind of think that my winemaking style is very much influenced by that passion, because I make wine with instinct. I don't analyze anything. And I think, we'll make sure our sugar is finished and we'll make sure our malo is finished with an outside lab just to make sure that it doesn't ferment in the bottle. But I don't know the pH, the alcohol, the tannins, anthocyanins. I don't know any of that stuff. To me, it's wortherless information. It's really, it's like,
right?
it's tasting it and it's experience and trusting instincts, because I think in the beginning I was a little bit more nervous because they were very high acid and very rustic tannins, but I allowed myself the ability to explore and find where it went without forcing it, and I think that was very fortunate. And I was able to develop an instinct that allows me to pick the grapes based on experience and that sense that gives me more balanced and elegant wines every year without waiting for some special number that might not ever come and might ruin the balance of the overall wine.
I love that. The final question is, how do you get away from wine? Do you still love to cook? Are you still a cook at heart? Are you still that little 8-year-old boy reading up all these cookery books?
I do love cooking, and I love cooking for friends and family. I think it's the best way to show my kind of affection for them. But my passion is woodworking and gardening. I love gardening, and I'm getting more and more into vegetable gardening and every year, and found that I have a passion for weeding when you do it right, which is very bizarre. But if you do it when it's just sprouting out every day, every 3 days, it's a pleasure. If you have to take out a tool to do it, it's less of a pleasure.
So weed by hand, yeah?
Weed by hand, and weed early and frequently. And it's like pulling out an alfalfa sprout. It's no trouble at all.
Well, Michael, thank you. It's been fascinating talking to you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Love your wines, and I'll see you soon. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye. Look forward to it. Thanks, Tim.
I don't know about you, but I so agree with Michael's thoughtful take on the world of wine. Next week on Cork Talk, my guest is Cathy Marshall from Catherine Marshall Wines in Stellenbosch. Join me then. Thanks for listening to Cork Talk. If you want to read more reports, articles and tasting notes by me, go to my website, timatkin.com. You can also follow me on Twitter @TimAtkin and on Instagram @TimAtkinMW. See you next week.